Netflix's solid 2025 is marred by engagement and WBD questions. The BBC is making YouTube shows, Sony hands its TV business to TCL, and Amazon sets another NFL record. Listen on.
Welcome to this week's edition of Inside the Stream. This is Will Richmond from Video News and Colin Dixon there from In-Screen Media. Colin, how is everything on your end?
It's doing good, but probably not as good as on your end, Will. Are you pumped about the Patriots' chances of making it to the Super Bowl?
We are all pumped here in New England, and Bo Nix, Broncos quarterback, getting injured there on the second to last play in OT was very unfortunate for him and for the team, but could accrue to the Patriots' benefit on Sunday. We're also expecting a major snowstorm here on Sunday, as is apparently much of the rest of the country, though not in your neck of the woods. So a lot coming up this weekend here.
Yes, indeed. And a lot is coming up in our podcast today, right?
It is. And we have a number of different topics. Netflix reported earnings, and you found some nuggets from that report, which you're going to share.
I did. So the top line is pretty good. They basically achieved all their financial objectives, they said. Listen to this, Will. They increased revenue overall in 2025 by 16%. It went from, I think, 37 billion to 45 billion between 2024 and 2025, which is pretty impressive performance. They said a 16% year-over-year growth. And they're doing with their operating margins are up as well. So that's all to the good. And they also said they haven't been giving us any regular updates on subscribers, but they did tell us that they'd increased subscribers from 301 million at the end of 2024 to 325, or just north of 325 million at the end of 2025, which is about an 8% increase. So they seem to be doing some things right. They say that actually a lot of that came from reduced churn, which seems to indicate that they're producing more content that people like and are keeping them sticking around. And they also said that India was a standout region for them in subscriber growth. So those two things seems to be responsible for the increase to 325 million. They did say a couple of other things that I thought were kind of interesting. One was they said, quote, engagement remains healthy, and pointing at a 2% increase in view hours in the second half of 2025 versus the second half of 2024. But that sum doesn't kind of add up for me, because a 2% increase in total viewing hours and an 8% increase in viewers means that the engagement per paid subscriber actually decreased 6%. So I'm not as rosy about their engagement as they seem to be based on those numbers. But they did say some pretty interesting things. They said that the branded originals form a much bigger part, 9% increase in viewing hours spent with branded originals, and they say that they now account for half of the viewing. And I gotta say, I'm actually finding more stuff on Netflix to watch than I did I had been in quite a while. So maybe that's true to say too. There was a lot of fuss, of course, in the earnings call, a lot of discussion rather in the earnings call about the Warner Brothers Discovery purchase. And I think Netflix went to great pains to explain how it will be accretive, and maybe we'll talk about a couple of the other more contentious things to do with the movie business in a second. But basically, they were talking about a lot of very healthy businesses going on in WBD, and that they would continue to run them as is, as well as get accretive value out of the big libraries and that would help generate more ad revenue, which they're also expecting to double in 2026 from 1.5 billion in 2025 to 3 billion in 2026. That's at least what they're saying. But, Wall Street did not agree. They basically, their stock has fallen from about 88 to 84, and it's still hovering around 84, I think, today. So Wall Street is unconvinced that the purchase of Warner Brothers Discovery is going to help out very much. But that's the sort of top line going on there, Will. They didn't really give us much more information on game services, except they're saying that the game service continues to grow, and they're actually saying that the home games, the couch games where people play together, where they're testing those out, are doing quite well. So that was really all they had to say there. So generally a good quarter, but Wall Street remains unconvinced. What do you think about what Ted Sarandos had to say about the movie business, bearing in mind how hostile it's been in the past?
Right. Well, he had a big interview in the New York Times that you and I were reading together. And I think the biggest nugget from that is a commitment he made that the theatrical window will remain 45 days. And, that's somewhat counter to statements he and other Netflix executives have made in the past. They've made a number of different comments over the years about how outmoded they think the movie business is. He kind of walked back some of those thoughts a little bit, tried to put them in context. But this is really, I think, the biggest question, or one of the biggest questions with Netflix, if they are indeed to prevail in this acquisition of Warner Brothers, is what happens to the theatrical release in general, and then windows beyond that. And there are a lot of people who are concerned that Netflix could crunch down or eliminate windows entirely. So that's one of the things that Paramount is arguing for, that they'll retain. And I think Netflix is kind of on making an effort right now to try to reassure folks that they will not tinker with the windows. So this is a big question, I think. And, the battle goes on. There was some data this week about low percentage of Warner Brothers shareholders voting to tender their shares to Paramount. We'll see how that goes. Paramount sweetened its offer again. I think it's now open until February 20th. Netflix also sweetened its offer to be all cash now. This story is not yet over, I don't think, Colin.
Not by any means, Will. But I think, as we talked about this deal, I think, at the end of last year, and both of us seem to agree that Netflix was the lesser of two evils here in the purchase. And I still tend to think that is the case. I do think that Netflix, certainly from the point of view of employees of Warner Brothers Discovery and the studios, etc., that's probably a much better outcome of them to go to Netflix. Because Paramount already has a studio, and there'll obviously be lots of rationalization there between the two if that happens. But I do think that Netflix will be a better stage for the Warner Brothers Discovery content. I was looking at the gauge for December, and really Warner Brothers Discovery is the poor boy streaming based on that data. They're right at the bottom at about 1.5% of TV time, behind Tubi, the Roku channel, and everybody else. They're the smallest part of that. So clearly they could do with better distribution and better promotion, and Netflix can probably bring that to that content. They also say that they're going to stick with the businesses that Warner Brothers Discovery currently has. So presumably that means they're going to continue to run the TV channel version of HBO as it is today, licensing it to, not licensing it, but selling that through pay TV operators as they do today. Maybe we'll get some better visibility from them on the balance between the streaming side of HBO and the broadcast side. Who knows? But anyway, as you say, not over by a long chalk. We're going to see this run and run, I think, for at least a couple of months.
Yeah, I agree with that. Paramount does not seem like they want to give up. They just keep raising their offer and trying to argue for its superiority. So I don't know what it's going to take for them to back out of this, but they don't seem like they're going to anytime soon.
No, they don't. But maybe that's enough on Netflix. Why don't we move on? I think we're going to talk about the BBC, who's doing something nobody else is doing, right?
Well, we just talked about the BBC and YouTube on last week's podcast, noting that there was new data that suggested that indicated that YouTube consumption on TVs in the UK had just nudged out consumption of BBC, and the qualifier on that was for very short duration, under 3 minutes. So BBC still led in over 3 minutes. That was last week's news. This week's news is that BBC and YouTube announced that BBC is now going to be making some custom shows for YouTube specifically, and these shows are going to be intended for younger viewers. And after they're released on YouTube, they'll then be available on BBC's iPlayer. So it's basically, it seems like a play for BBC to get more viewership via the YouTube platform. Question here, of course, is this just BBC feeding YouTube to have even more consumption there? And is it possibly a short-term victory, but what's the impact in the long term? And this deal actually reminded me just a little bit in parallel. It reminded me a little bit of the early days when studios and networks were licensing their older content to Netflix, and they thought, we'll pick up some extra money and this will be great. What ended up happening was they just fed Netflix's popularity as a viewing platform and also gave Netflix greater financial strength to be able to invest in creating their own originals. So long term, and then eventually they pulled a lot of those licensing rights were pulled from Netflix. So not an exact parallel here, but it does feel a little bit familiar that YouTube is a big platform and BBC is trying to figure out how it competes with that. And even as it is, it's going to now start making programming for YouTube. So not sure exactly how that's going to be a long-term win for them, but we'll have to wait and see.
No, and that is this is, of course, the really big question, Will, as we talked about last week. It's really difficult for broadcasters to deal with this YouTube model. Now, I should say the mandate for the BBC is a little bit different than it is for a for-profit organisation. BBC in the UK, I should say, this is not BBC Worldwide. BBC Worldwide is a for-profit entity. But the BBC in the UK is not. It's a not-for-profit entity. Its mandate is really to get the content, to get relevant content to viewers in the UK. And really, this makes a lot of sense, I think, from that perspective. If people will not come to the iPlayer app or they're watching more on YouTube, it makes a lot of sense for the BBC to start to make content specifically for that platform where those viewers are, where it can reach them with UK created content, with UK values and UK themes. So I think that makes a lot of sense. It's certainly something that Ofcom, who's the regulator for the broadcast industry in the UK, has been recommending that broadcasters do, and particularly that the BBC does. There is a little bit of revenue involved here. These are not going to be ad free. They're going to have ads shown against them, just like any other YouTube content does. I doubt that it's going to generate appreciable revenue. One of the big things that the BBC is doing right now is wrestling with the idea of how it gets away from charging the license fee which basically everybody pays in the UK, and it's quite considerable, by the way. It's probably £240 a year, I think, or something like that. So there's that. It does feel a little bit of revenue in there. But this is a grand experiment, as you said, Will. We don't know if this is just feeding YouTube's continued growth and growing dominance of television, or if it's a shrewd move to continue to have your content viewed by the people that you want to view it. And only time will tell that, I guess.
We will keep an eye on that one. Let's move on to the next story just to keep things going, and some news out of Sony, some surprising news out of Sony earlier this week, right?
You bet. Will, I don't know about you, but when I was buying TV sets in the past, Sony was kind of the gold standard. Getting a Sony TV, they were always the most expensive TVs, and I always wanted one, and I never felt like I could justify spending the money on those. Well, what a change. Sony and TCL Electronics had a joint press release last week, and that they're saying that the companies have agreed to move forward with discussions and consideration for a strategic partnership in the home entertainment field. Broadly, they're going to establish a new company in which TCL will have the 51% controlling increase and Sony 49%, that will house Sony's high-end Bravia TVs and basically its home entertainment business. And this is a huge change. What the company will be doing is they will be designing and manufacturing and selling televisions worldwide and home audio equipment worldwide. And they will be going out under the Sony and Bravia brands. But basically, this is controlled and operated by TCL. And this is just... I'm still trying to get my head around this. I actually have a Sony TV, and we purchased that Sony TV because in the price range that we were looking, there was no question in our minds, myself and my spouse mind, that this was the best picture. They very definitely have some very clever video engineers working inside of Sony, producing video chips that do make an appreciable difference to the television picture. Well, that technology is going into this company and will be part and parcel of this new JV, which they say they're hoping they'll have reached agreement for by March of 2026. And they're also saying they're expecting it to start operation in April of 2027. I will say that Sony missed a big opportunity. They have embraced Google TV as the operating system for their televisions, and basically, I'm guessing, are getting very little kickbacks from the recurring revenue models that are enabled by Google TV on those televisions. It has, in my mind, damaged the image of Sony Bravia, because now I am getting ads for Target and all sorts of things playing full screen, and actually I get blocked from moving away from them for a few seconds when I first turn the television on. Very frustrating. Perhaps TCL will fix that in this joint venture. But it's in my mind, Will, it's an admission by Sony that they just can't keep up in the television business anymore.
Yeah, totally agree. And also agree with your comment about Sony having been the gold standard, because like you, I also remember back in the days where the Sony brand was positioned, and it was very aspirational. To own a Sony TV was a big deal at one point.
Wasn't it?
It's hard to even say those words right now because it's not any longer. But my sense is that they were upmarket while the rest of the TV market was moving down. And we see that TCL certainly is a leader in low-cost TVs, Roku, the Amazon TVs, and Best Buy had their own brand of TV insignia for a while. And it's been a while since I shopped for a TV, but I do recall going in and feeling like those Sony TVs were really the premium products. And they kind of got wedged into an ever smaller corner of the market. And to your point, they also did not create their own operating system. So then they were going out. It's really a hardware company, first and foremost. Then they're having to go out and get a partner, Google TV. And they no longer control the user experience. It's supposed to be a premium product. And instead what happens is they get what Google TV is doing. And that, as you said, includes ads. And that's jarring for the brand experience. And before you know it, they're boxed into a corner and they're doing a JV and basically getting rid of the TV business. And that's a sad commentary on how that business was run, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And boy, I don't know, TCL have definitely been going up market looking at what they announced at CES. TCL, Hisense, they're doing some great stuff in TVs these days. Of course, so is LG and so is Samsung. But big climb down. But anyway, we have one more story that we wanted to mention today. This goes back to not this week, but the last week, but still pretty interesting, right?
Yeah, we just wanted to mention this for continuity because we are, of course, in NFL playoff season, and I think it was 2 weeks ago we talked about the Christmas Day record audience that Amazon generates 27.5 million viewers for the Lions-Vikings wildcard game. So we just wanted to mention that record has already been eclipsed just a little over a week ago in the Packers-Bears wildcard playoff game, which drew 31.6 million viewers, and that is a record. That's the most number of streaming viewers for ever for Prime Video and for an NFL game in U.S. history. So that's a big mark, and we have been following, Colin, obviously for ages now, the growth in streamers' presence in live sports, and also the growth of live streaming in general. And these numbers really seem to bear out that Amazon has had a big success here with NFL streaming. Thursday night audience was also at a record this year. I think we talked about that last time. And they also seem to have really nailed things with live streaming games. So this is, I think, noteworthy. And, at some point, the NFL the big packages will be up for grabs. And you have to believe that Amazon's confidence is growing with each one of these new records that they're setting.
Yeah, I think so, Will. And I think actually part of Netflix's success in December, in the December Nielsen The Gauge ratings, it was actually saw quite a big increase in its share of TVs, partly due to its carriage of the two Christmas Day games, which also set records, and we talked about those before. So I don't expect the Super Bowl itself will eclipse or come anywhere near that record. I expect the streaming numbers to be in the 20 to 20, well, probably 25 million range if we include the virtual MVPDs, and that's of course being carried this year by NBC. And part of the reasons there is it'll be pretty much broadly covered on broadcast in all markets, as well as on Peacock and NFL Plus. So it's got so broad coverage that Peacock's share of that and the streaming share of that will probably be a bit lower, but should still be significant. But as you say, big growth in streaming live, and that's going to be a theme this year. This is an Olympics year, so maybe NBC won't have a big hit on Peacock with the Super Bowl, but I do expect a lot more people to be watching the Olympics on Peacock this year based on what a fantastic job they did last time. So, they're looking forward to seeing that.
Well, let's leave it at that, Colin. And certainly a lot of different movement here in the industry, as we just talked about. And we'll continue to watch these stories as they unfold.
We will indeed.
Okay, thanks for chatting, Colin. Thanks, everyone, for listening on this week's edition of Inside the Stream. And we'll see you all again next week.
Inside the Stream is a production of In-Screen Media and Video News, all rights reserved.